I'm Dr. Mitch Nichols.
I'm Dr. Eric Stennett.
I am one of the cohort coordinators for the EDD program.
And I'm the director of the EDD program.
What we want to talk to you today about is the final oral defense of the dissertation. And when we begin to talk about that, that means that anyone watching this has gone through the proposal defense successfully. They've done IRB successfully, and they're somewhere in chapters 4 and 5 contemplating what that whole process is going to look like in terms of the final oral defense.
That's correct. Typically, the chair will always, as always, be in charge of when the final defense occurs. But I would remind students that the chair is going to make sure chapter 4 and 5 is in a place where it's a defendable dissertation. And they will notify you of that, and then they'll set a date through my office for you to have your oral defense and complete it.
It's an exciting time because at that point you can begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
It is, and I think while that oral defense, it can be a scary proposition to stand up in front of university faculty and fellow students and colleagues. The thing you need to remember as a student is that you are the expert in that area. You spent over 2 years of your time, blood, sweat, and tears, learning about your topic, dissecting your topic, researching your topic, and completing the 5 chapters on your topic. So I think it's pretty critical to understand that you really are going to be the expert in the room, but you do have to defend that expertise.
I think they also need to understand that when they get to that particular stage, chapters 4 and 5 especially, and they're trying to tie everything together, there's a certain type of fatigue that begins to set in on them, and some will be wanting to give up at that point, but they're too close to the end of this journey that they've started, so they need to stick it out and stay in close contact with their chair.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that having a communication with your chair about how close you are and making sure that your communication with them is much more frequent, I think that'll keep you on track to finish and prepare for that oral defense.
Now, the people who may attend the final oral defense are faculty, because the notice is going to go out through the education department, possibly through the whole university.
Correct, correct.
Staff members can show up at that final oral defense, students, especially some of your peers that you've gone through your cohort with, and family members may also attend.
I would recommend if you are going to bring family, I would not bring children under the age 12. It's a 90-minute academic experience where typically children that age are not going to really respond appropriately. And it is a very serious event as you are defending your dissertation, giving an oral presentation, and then receiving questions from your committee and chair. It can be pretty taxing, so it's really not recommended for children under 12.
We look at that process as being in 4 parts when they're doing the final oral defense. Number 1, the candidate introduces himself or herself.
That is correct. So when you do come in for your dissertation defense, the very first part is the chair will make an announcement announcing that you are about to defend your dissertation, and that is the introduction. And they will give the podium up to you as the candidate, and at that point you introduce yourself. You greet the room and you will thank your committee and chair, and then you begin your presentation.
Then the candidate will present a summary of their work. What does that involve? So
you will present a PowerPoint slideshow, and that's typically the format. We don't recommend Prezi or a different type of software. PowerPoint is common. You're going to present all 5 chapters of your dissertation. Now, in your proposal defense, you will talk about 1 to 3. So the first part of that presentation is a brief summary of chapters 1 to 3. Most of your presentation will be in chapters 4, which are your findings, and chapter 5, which are the implications of your findings.
Now, I'm not sure how you would look at this particular thing, but when I like presentations and when I do them professionally, I don't put all of those characters in it, all that kind of stuff. I just like the presentation. I like the PowerPoint to be straightforward.
Yeah, I would agree. I think your dissertation defense, that PowerPoint should be the highlights and the main points. And I would also add that you should be able to give that presentation from anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. If you're going over that, it's an indication to the committee that you really don't understand your topic.
One of the things I think that will be helpful to them, Eric, is the idea that you always, as they did for the proposal defense, you share that PowerPoint with your chair so that your chair can help you time it out, edit it if necessary to make sure, again, things are tight, as succinct as possible.
That is correct. And the chair, they really will help you make sure that presentation is really firm and tight. I would also recommend, and your family members will love this, I would present it to somebody, somebody in your family, a colleague, a peer, a confidant, just to get your timing down. And in rare circumstances, though, that can also be your chair if you just want to make sure. But I really do recommend you present that PowerPoint presentation prior to the actual defense to somebody on the outside.
The candidate, as sharing their information, can be interrupted during that time with questions by members of their committee.
It can be. I haven't really seen that happen, but if it's something they're not clear about, they could stop you and say, could you just clarify that point? It's happened once or twice, but that's just because something you're saying is not clear. I would recommend at that point, too, you really don't need to get frazzled. I've seen people get very nervous and get upset and get frazzled at a point where they're being questioned. It's the point of this is it's a defense. You're defending. So you have to know what you're talking about because you've spent the time in that topic. So you don't want to get frazzled. You want to take the question, answer it appropriately, and answer it truthfully and honestly, and then they will move on.
One of the tips I give people when they have to do public speaking, some type of a presentation, is when you get to the podium, take a nice breath, inhale, exhale, and probably have just a little bit of water near you so that you can begin to wet your palate and then respond. I also caution people that when they get questions from members of their committee, pause for just a moment. Think about what you're going to say, but don't make it a long pause so that you can frame your answer as it fits that particular question that you're being asked.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, this is going to be some individual, ideas of how you want to present. But this is one of the rare times when I don't suggest you walk around the room. When you teach a class, you move around for proximity, you move around to keep engagement. At this point, you don't need to stand directly behind a podium, but you don't want to wander the room. You want to be up front, you want to be authoritative in your approach, and you want to be in charge. I would also recommend that while it's important that you take a breath, some people like to write things down. So there's no problem with you taking a minute for a few seconds to write down something from that question. It just depends on your individual style. But again, I agree. Take a pause, take a breath, think about what you're going to say, and then answer the question appropriately.
A fourth key point is that the committee will meet after you have done your presentation, after questions have been asked. The committee will meet in private. That means everybody leaves the room at that particular point, including the candidate, so that the committee can begin to debrief as to how they sense the success of that particular presentation and defense.
So that is correct. At this point, once you've finished your presentation, and at that point, the question and answer portion of that defense occurs, and that can last long. I mean, this is a 90-minute time block, so it can go longer, it could be a little shorter, but they're going to ask the questions until they feel they've asked every question necessary, and you'll hear the chair say, has everybody asked enough questions? Are you confident? And they'll say, yes, I have no further questions. Now, it is up to the chair at that point whether they want to open the forum for the rest of the room to ask questions.
I haven't seen it happen.
That doesn't
way
happen
before.
often. It's happened once, and I had to be honest with you, that was directed to me to ask a question because I wanted to ask one. So I would just say that while it can happen, it's very rare because really we don't want to get into audience members asking a lot of questions that aren't relevant. Once the questions are over, as you said, the whole room is dismissed except for the committee and the chair. At that point, they are deliberating on the success of your defense, and then are there more modifications for publishing? And at that point, when they feel they have discussed it and whether or not you are successful, they will call everybody back into the room to make the announcement whether you have successfully defended your dissertation.
Now, I've seen that time period be maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, so that the person who's waiting out in the hallway, the candidate, is not about to pass out wondering, I wonder what they're talking about in there.
Right.
The committee is basically trying to assess the impact and the depth of what has been shared, how the responses have been. Again, the responses need to be kept very, very brief. I've seen some students in proposal defense just go on and on and on, and typically, even in a proposal defense, I've tried to keep my students very close to me. I don't want them sitting someplace that I can't kind of tap them like, hey,
Yeah.
Stick to the point. Don't elaborate. Don't get off course, because the committed members are going to be watching to see whether you can appropriately answer those questions.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, they're going to test your knowledge base, and I commonly will ask a question outside the scope of your study. And I would expect the response to be, that's not something I studied. We want you to leave Point Park being an expert, but being an expert in what you studied, not something that's auxiliary or peripheral to your topic. You have to learn when to say, that's not something I studied, that's something for a further study. That's one of the implications in some of the responses we'd like to hear from students. Again, it's not about tricking you, it's about pushing you and making sure you understand that this is a defense and you are the expert at the end of the day.
Total time of the final oral defense, somewhere between 90 minutes and no more than 2 hours.
Correct. I've not seen one go over 90 minutes. It just is way too much time. A little bit over, but not really. So 90 minutes is the typical time frame for that dissertation defense.
As I've looked online to see what other universities do, including one that I really like that is very close to what we're doing here, was Columbia University. So if you, some of the questions, I mean, the presentation needs to address at least these 3 questions. What is the problem you're studying? Why is it important? And what results have you received?
That's absolutely correct. Columbia is one of the models a lot of universities have followed. So really, that's really what we're after. Those 3 questions are really succinct. And if you can answer those 3 questions and the committee's confident that you've answered those questions, you're really going to be successful. You know, the chair's not going to set you up for failure, but they are going to push you and make sure you defend.
Well, the chair shouldn't set a person up for failure, because you represent that chair.
That's right.
The hours that the 2 of you have spent together outside of those rooms, outside of the purview of other faculty members, you represent that chair in that setting, and every chair wants you to be successful. And as you are becoming successful, you shine, which means your chair shines.
Yeah, I find that one thing I was not ready for when I took on this job as director of the program, I was not prepared for the emotional impact of that event. It's a culmination of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears for your chair, and more so for your student, but it's almost like it's really over, and you're proud of your student, and I know the student's proud of what they have offered the university.
I shared with you a while ago when my mother finished her PhD at the University of Pittsburgh some years before I did mine. She came home after that particular defense, and she says, "Now I'm a doctor. What am I going to do?" Yeah. I think students have to keep that all in context. They've been on a journey. It's going to be very organized. They shouldn't have perhaps more than 30 slides in their presentation, because otherwise they get stuck to the slides.
You know, the most interesting thing, and I always say to the students when they come into our program, getting a title of EDD, PhD, you're not any smarter. You don't have a sudden change that I'm this intellectual giant. But what does change is you have become an expert in an area, and you've learned about endurance, and you learned about research, and you just have that sense of accomplishment. And it's a wonderful process, and it's a wonderful thing that not a lot of people get to experience.
Having been faculty members for years, you've worked elsewhere before coming to Point Park University, and so have I. We've seen students present in all kinds of attire. We need to remind candidates, as you are preparing for your final oral defense, this is a professional presentation. You need to dress the part. We don't want you in a tuxedo or a gown, but we want them looking professional.
Right, and I would add to that, not only should you be dressing, but acting professional. It's a very serious event while you're on the stage and while we're going through the process. I'd also remind you that your slideshow needs to be professional as well. That's not a place for clip art. It's not a place for jokes. It's a place to show that you are academically ready to defend.
And again, I think as they share this with their chair prior to final oral defense, the chair will probably say, we don't need this. Right. We don't need, even if you think as a student that it's important, that chair has a lot to say about how you begin to present this information.
That is correct. That is correct.
Any final words, Dr. Stinnett?
I would just say best of luck. I think you've got, when you're heading into this part of the journey, be confident. You're the expert in the room. You probably know more than your chair and your committee about your topic. Show us that, and you'll be absolutely successful.
And again, congratulations for getting to this part of your journey.